Alright, can you guys hear me? Alright. I'm gonna get the chat up. I'm getting it up on my laptop so that way I can see what you guys respond with. So give me 1 second for that. LG is Luke. Alright. It is 7:31, so whoever's here is here, and anybody else can watch it on delay. So this is our basic separation of powers. So the first test is mainly going to focus just on the fact that we have three different branches and how they work independently from each other. So we've got the legislative, executive, judicial. Now, it's the reason we usually do them in this order because in the Constitution we have Article 1, Article 2, Article 3. So, this one, if you get a question on the test, Article 1 dealing with Senate or something, they're basically just trying to get you to know legislative is the first article in the Constitution. The executive is the second article, judicial is the third article. You guys are, it's not cheating. I've told you this. It's good practice for the SOL. You're allowed to bring in a blank piece of paper and basically make your own little chart if it makes it out. I think it's really easy to do that because then you can write down their main jobs. We have legislative, their jobs to make the laws. Executives carry out the laws, and judicial is to, it says evaluates there on this diagram, but the word that Virginia likes to use is interpret. Evaluate and interpret are synonyms, same thing, but just so we're all clear on that. Now, let's see how much you guys paid attention. What are the other terms I could say other than carries out? There was two different things I could say that were not carries out. What's another way of saying the executive branch's job? Good. Execute and enforces. Both are the right answers, and that's all we were looking for. Very good. Execute and enforces. So we have executive branch starting in the middle, and I'll work my way back to the outsides. That's our president and vice president, along with his cabinet. The cabinet is all those secretaries: Secretary of Defense, Secretary of Agriculture, Secretary of Transportation. Essentially, president's got a lot of laws to make sure that our country is being run properly. That he can't do it on his own, so he has all these extra cabinet people to help him out. For now, the purpose is you just need to know that they're called the cabinet. You don't have to know every single secretary. Um, let's see if you remember from your study guide. What do we call? What's the fancy way of saying the president's running the country? What's the fancy way of saying, the president? One of his job is to run the country, or run the government, but it's not going to say it that way. It's going to say it in a more academic sense. Remember from their study guide? It's not going to be one word, so it's going to be more of a phrase. No, Commander-in-Chief is military. And Wubit's here. That's correct. He administers the federal bureaucracy. So he's kind of the one overseeing all, the agencies, FBI, NSA, EPA, the alphabet soup list of organizations. He's the one kind of making sure everybody's doing their jobs, making sure everybody's doing what they're supposed to. And in the end, he gets the credit sometimes. He definitely gets all the blame when it goes wrong. So um, that's where that comes from. Legislative, their job is to make laws. Again, you see our representatives are the ones based on population. Here's our Senate. Every state gets 2. We add those together. We get almost our electoral votes plus DC gives us our 538. Over here, again, I'm telling you, I'm going to use the word interpret on the test. Oh, wait, before I go too far, back to legislative. The fact that we have 2 houses, what word is that? What word describes our type of legislature? 1 house? 2 house. What's the word? Alright, I'm trying to type and talk at the same time and I messed up. Alright, hold on one sec. Bicameral means 2 houses. Correct. Good job. Bureaucracy is basically another fancy way of saying government. So ignore what I typed. I'm sorry. But man, you guys are fast typers. So, everybody that's here, okay? So, we have a bicameral legislature, 2 houses. Pretty much guarantee there's going to be a test question. As long as you just know what bicameral means, you'll be good to go there. So, here's their jobs. Again, we're still on the first test. Basically, this is what they do. All right, and I'm going to start again with the legislative. They were designed to be the most powerful. If you can get a majority of 535 congressmen to agree, the idea is that it's a good idea. Instead of having one person or even 9 people be the most powerful, the idea was this branch was supposed to be the most powerful. That's why it has the power to make laws. It's the approver of all the appointments. If you appoint an ambassador, appoint a judge, appoint a cabinet position, they all have to be approved by Congress or the legislative branch. Just for my own satisfaction, what's appointment mean? What's appoint? What's a simple way of saying the word appoint? Not elect. Choose is not a bad way of thinking about it. Choose is fine. Choose works. Adris typed it. I didn't even see Adris in there. Adris got it. Select. Appoint is to select. So, for instance, right now, Trump is selecting his cabinet. He is picking people that he wants to run. That doesn't mean they have the job, necessarily. They then have to be approved by the legislative, uh, both houses of Congress. Alright? Guys, focus on the review. Let's go, okay? So, there's some powers not listed under this graphic that I have up here. Can anybody put them up there that is not on this graphic? So, what are some of the legislative powers that are not up here? Let's see how much you study. At least if you have your study guide out, this should be easy. So just type 1. Let's just see who can get them in. Don't worry about typing them all. Again, they approve the making of money, right? I'm not asking for what's in the legislative branch, Mariah. I'm asking for their jobs. What are their powers? They can impeach the president. That's more of a check, but that is correct, Wubit. It's not wrong. You didn't have to delete it, but I was just saying I was gonna save that for later. Yes, study guide. Okay, what do they approve, Bryson? You can't just make blame. They're the ones in charge of taxes. Okay, they regulate trade. Good job. So those are the ones I was hoping to get. There's one more you're missing that's pretty big, but we'll go up there. Making taxes. They're in charge of collecting revenue. Remember that word, revenue? They're not going to say money. They're going to say revenue. Okay. Approve appointments is correct. We already went over the approving the appointments, Kylie, but yes, you're right there. So revenue is the fancy way of saying money. Regulating trade. Interstate, meaning trade between Virginia, Maryland, Virginia, and Texas, anytime it's involving more than one state. Or foreign trade, when we're dealing with another country, they're the ones that regulate it. And Mariah got the last one, declaring war. They are the branch that officially declares war. We talked about in class. The last time we officially declared war was in World War II. Even though we've obviously been involved in conflict since then, that was our last official war when Congress actually voted on to go to war. And that's why you're reviewing, Rami, so you don't forget. So just think of it as revenue as a fancy way of saying collecting money. It's just a more academic way of saying it. So when we pay our taxes, that's the government's revenue. That's the money they're earning, they're taking in. And yes, they all are approving. Except for Mariah, the legislative branch does not prepare the annual budget. They would be the ones approving it. They are moderators because they tend to don't say weird and random things. So anyways, let's go to executive branch. So again, this is our branch with the president, vice president, his cabinet. So we have signs laws or veto laws. So if these guys make a bill, they can sign or veto it. We'll get into later how they interact when we get to checks and balances. They can pardon. Pardon means basically, here's your get out of jail free card. Okay? They appoint the federal judges. They appoint ambassadors. They appoint basically any position within the government that has a title, judges, ambassadors, cabinet, all those people. They're in charge of appointing them, and then again, Congress approves them, as you guys have already said. They prepare the annual budget. Good. Mariah's getting a little ahead of me, but yes. They prepare the budget. And Theodore. It says elected 4 years, just to be clear. Senate's over here. Senators are every 6, and representatives are every 2. I don't think I asked you about that, but just in case I do. So we already said enforce, carry out. We're going to get into more how they interact. I'm going to get to the last one here. So Article 1, Article 2, Article 3. These guys really have one power. What is it called if we say decide if laws are constitutional? What power? Well, first of all, what's the highest court? What's the highest court? No, all right, hold on. Freeze. Theo, no, that's not what happens. Okay? That's not what happens. These guys are in charge. Legislative is in charge of making the laws. They propose the bill, and they approve the bill. Or no, I'm sorry, they make the bills. They get it. Enough people vote on it. Then the president has the choice. He can either sign it into law and it's done. Nothing else needs to be done except to decide over here if it's constitutional. Again, we're getting into checks and balances. Or he can veto it. These guys have the right to override that veto. Again, we're getting into checks and balances. I was trying to avoid that until we got there. The president, one time a year, during the State of the Union address, which I'm not going to ask you about on the test. It's not for this test. That's actually the next time we have a test. It'll be on there. He can propose legislation. That's why I don't even use the word propose. I kept telling you recommend on the study guide. He can recommend legislation year-round, and what'll happen is some congressman will say, I agree with you, President. That sounds like a good idea. I will bring this up in Congress. And that's how the president can help push legislation through. It does not mean, though, that the president is personally going over to the Congress building and proposing bills every other day. Okay? So I want to go back to that. Now, yes, you guys, back to judicial. You guys got it. Supreme Court is the highest court. And what do we call And what do we call the fact that they decide if laws are constitutional or unconstitutional? Is judicial review. Pretty much whenever you see this word constitutional, these guys, yeah, everybody gets their power here from the Constitution. Constitution gives them their powers, Constitution gives their powers, and so on. But you're not going to see this word constitutional with any of with legislative or executive. It's pretty much for judicial. That's your dead giveaway. Again, they're appointed by the president, meaning they're approved by legislative. They serve life sentences. And again, that one big power is just judicial review. If they say you can't do it, they use the power of judicial review. If they say it's okay, they use the power of judicial review. It's judicial review is the only power they have. It's just a really big one because essentially they can say, "Nah, I don't think this is what the founders had in mind. It violates the Constitution. Nope, you can't do it." So even if they make the bill, even if he approves the bill, they still say, "Yeah, it's constitutional. It's good." All right. So that's it for the first test. Okay. All right. Now we're on checks and balances. So I wanted to show you guys this. So again, if you're watching this for whatever reason on the way to school tomorrow, I'm trying to give you as many visuals. That's why got pictures this time and did bigger, blew them up instead of just trying to go through things really quickly. That way you can stop and pause it and like just get a quick study. You can literally get this off of Google by typing in checks and balances cheat sheet. So it's not like it's hard to find, guys. So if you want this, by all means, print it off. We essentially made this. We did it a different way. I'll show you that other way in a minute. So these are all the different powers that each branch has over each other. The way we did it in class was like this. So if you're wondering, Mom and Dad, if you're watching, the study guide, they were given this sheet, except for, you see these bolded words at points? I took them out, and the students had to fill them in. Now this one has the picture of what we made in class. And I like doing it this way because you can see it a little bit better. So for instance, we were talking about it earlier. Legislative branch, their job is to make laws. In this case it says, and can pass laws or it says it can pass laws. He can veto. So they make a law, goes over here. He vetoes a law, goes back here. They override the veto. Boom, executive branch, you're pretty much done. Except for now, the judicial branch can step in and say, that law is unconstitutional. If the president does something, besides, I don't like the protest, drive a tank through them, judicial branch can say that's unconstitutional. And that could lead to their power of impeachment. So again, it's one big circle of how they interact with each other. But if you had trouble understanding that triangle when we went over it, then this is maybe a better way for you to understand it. So again, this proposed laws, I purposely did not tell you that. I don't want you to get fixated on that. The better word here is recommend. He can only propose laws once a year. These guys are the ones who make our laws. Do not get hung up on this. It is technically his right to do so during the State of the Union address, but that's not what he's usually doing. So, we already said they make laws. He can veto the law. Boom. They can override the veto. They have to approve. So if they don't like his appointments, who he's nominating to fill all these positions, they can deny it. He gets to call up the Prime Minister of Great Britain, the President of Mexico, whatever country, and make a treaty. Well, Congress has to approve the treaty. It's happened several times throughout our history. No need to go into it now, but the point is Congress doesn't always approve the treaty. Congress has, come out looking like smelling roses compared with other countries, and then when he gets back, he does not have the backing of Congress, and that's their way of saying, no, we didn't really like what you had, the deal you made. As I said, Congress is probably declare war. Appropriate money is a fancy way of saying making money. and they can impeach and remove the president. So if they don't like the job this branch is doing, they can fire him or remove him. Judicial branch on the executive, they don't like the job he's doing, or they don't like something he did, they declare it unconstitutional using judicial review. Checks on judicial, appoints judges. Again, he gets to pick the judges. Now there's only 9 Supreme Court justices, but there are a ton of federal courts, so he's going Trump will be nominating and appointing several judges coming up. The president can also grant pardons. We already talked about that. I'm not going to really ask you a ton of questions about that, but just in case you're curious, granting a pardon is essentially saying, you're free to go. I think you've paid your debt, or you were wrongfully accused. Legislative, they're in charge of making courts. So essentially, they can say, you know what, this court jurisdiction, meaning this area in which they decide cases on, is too big. Let's cut it in half and make another court. So essentially, they can decide how many courts we have. They can impeach judges, meaning remove them. It says it right there. While the judicial branch can say, we don't like that law, we think it's unconstitutional, Congress can then make an amendment proposal. And if it were to be approved by the states, which you guys learned earlier this year, how amendments come to be, then judicial branch has to accept that as part of the Constitution. Again, that's one more check. And again, they have to approve the appointment. So he nominates, they approve. And again, if they think that a law is not right, like for instance when we did in class, like having a beard would give you a fine, they can say, no, that's unconstitutional and you can't do it. Alright, I know you guys were typing up a storm. I just want to go over this so I can answer questions here. Here's the website. You can always go to this site. It's solpass.org. You can type it into Google if you lost yours or didn't bring yours home. And basically it gives you a quick, study guide on to what we're going to be going over on the test tomorrow. It maybe doesn't hit every single thing we talked about in our notes. In case you're wondering, this is next, if you want to get a little preview of what we're going to be going over next. It doesn't hit on every single thing, but it does do a pretty good job and gets most of it. So, I see people are going crazy in the chat. Alright, there's the tradition out of the way. Alright, let me go up and see what I missed here, because you guys were typing pretty quick. Could I name some major laws that Congress didn't approve or the president vetoed? Maybe even judicial branch canceling it? I mean, well, we talked about some of the amendments that were never approved, such as lowering the voting age to 16, lowering the drinking age to 18, at what age people could be sent off to a war, and so on. Those were always amendments that never passed. So those are amendments. But laws, there's laws all the time. Trying to think of one that just happened. There was a law to where the president vetoed. It was a law saying that New York citizens who their relatives died on 9/11 should have the right to take the Saudi Arabian government to court because they believe they had ties to 9/11 attacks. Congress passed it pretty much unanimously. President vetoed it because he's afraid of what might happen with international ties. If you can start taking government to court, then it's not like America's guilt-free. They could start taking America to court in other countries as well, and it could start a whole bunch of things, open up Pandora's box, and then Congress overrode his veto. That's actually one. It didn't really happen a lot during Obama's time, but there's one example of your checks and balances. Mariah, why do people always blame? I'm going up, so I'll get to the bottom here in a second for your questions. So why people always blame the president for war when Congress declares it? Because Vietnam, Korea, Gulf, Iraq, Afghanistan, we've all been in conflicts and Congress didn't declare it. The president took a police action. One thing we're going to be learning in the next section, and like I said, you can start getting to scroll down here and you can start seeing this is what the president does. Um, where is it? This little bullet point right here at the bottom. President Petro has grown in years since the Constitution was ratified, and that's one of the ways they've grown in power. Basically, the president kind of stopped asking for permission all the time and started doing. There's been a lot more executive actions taking place um, in recent years compared to 100 years ago. Um, so there's a reason the president gets blamed is because they also did it. All right, let me see. I think they got deleted because I put them in timeout. As to Rami's comments. Alright, so you guys understand what's on the test. The first test is basically what they do. Congress, legislative, first article of the Constitution. Constitution is where they get their power from. They're the ones that make laws. Okay, they are the approver, confirm, all the same thing. They're in charge of the money. Second article, president enforces the law. Is in charge of all the government organizations and cabinet and making sure the law is being carried out. Judicial interprets the laws, and basically, they decide making sure that the Constitution's being followed correctly, that we're not just misinterpreting it to suit our own ways. Checks and balances. Look for which branch is checking who. Okay, how can the legislative branch check the executive? Well, they have to be doing something to the executive. If it says Congress is approving a Supreme Court judge, that's them checking judicial. If it said they are approving an ambassador, that's them checking executive because that's under the executive branch. So, my mic and everything is fine. Don't know what to tell you. So, again, this is the place to get it. I don't want to make this, super long in case people do want to watch it on their own time. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to shut the stream off. I'll type in answers. I'll turn it back on in 1 second. That way I can just do it that way. But I want to end it so that way if people do watch it, they're not watching a ton of stuff. Alright? So, freaking killing mosquito here. In case you're wondering what that clapping noise is. Alright, so let's answer some of these questions. I will if I can. Theodore, I answered your question, buddy. Go back in the video and watch. Can you give us an easier way to remember the things the different branches do other than to make, enforce, and interpret laws? So, God, this mosquito won't die. Legislative has to do with anything with a bill. If it's talking about a bill, for the most part, it's going to be Congress, legislative, unless it comes to signing the bill or vetoing the bill. I'm not going to look to trick you, but I have to teach you that the executive branch can propose because it is one of their powers that they can technically do. They don't use it often, and I don't know what the SOL is prepared to ask you. That's why I kind of just say don't think about it as much. Executive, they're the ones enforcing law, and pretty much that's the government right there. And the only time judicial plays a part is if they think that something's violating the Constitution, like it's a law that was made that's wrong, or the president's handling a situation wrong. They can step in and say, no. See, that's like, they're like the supervisor. That's unconstitutional, guys. You can't do that. You need to basically, it's the Constitution says you got to do it this way. And yes, Carson, you were right. I'm going to leave it on the study guide. Again, feel free to go to that. The fractions, that was a time game today that we played where It just told you how many questions we had left. They didn't mean anything. Alright, any other questions? There's 100 senators, 435 representatives. I don't know what you're asking there, Rami. Any other questions? It was giving you a choice between the three branches of government. There was 48 selections. It was seeing how fast you could do it. I don't understand what you're confused about, Mariah. The legislative branch is the main branch when it comes to impeaching, yes. They got to vote on it, and they can vote to impeach, meaning to remove. So they can impeach presidents, and they can impeach judges. For the purposes of my class, yes, Theodore. Again, I'm giving you what I think are basically shortcuts to knowing what this stuff means. When you get into government, you can take a whole college course on this stuff, guys, and still be trying to understand it the whole way. So these are big concepts that you're trying to understand. So if you're struggling, it's okay. It's not the end of the world. There are adults who still struggle with this sometimes and understanding exactly how the government all works. So they wouldn't impeach themselves. Essentially, they can resign, and they'll be encouraged. But mostly, Congress, like representatives, they're up for election every 2 years. We can just vote them out of office if we think they're not doing a good job. Can I give you an example of a question we might find on the quiz? Sure. You might find an example of a question asking about bicameral. You might find an example of a question asking what are the powers of legislative or executive. And you might have to tell me how many there are. That'll probably be the hardest question, actually. I think there's a question where it goes, which of the following four out of 8 choices are legislative powers? And you got to be able to click on the 4 that are. Something like that. So wait, what can executive do to judicial? The executive is the one in charge of appointing judges. So a judge can't get the job of being a federal judge without the president appointing them. Yeah, you guys are really not good at counting. I don't get it. I make sure every time we do one of those questions, I tell you how many answer choices you have to pick. Every time somebody picks 3 or 5 or 2, basically anything but 4 or whatever, how many choices it is. There'll be picture questions, yes. I mean, you've seen the test and how we make them before, Theodore. We're not going in there with the express purpose of tricking you just to say, haha, you missed one. So, I would just use your own head there, bud. Do you think I'm going to try and word it a way that would purposely confuse you? What didn't I answer, Rami? Bi is 2. Eliminate every other answer that doesn't say 2. bicycle, two wheels. I think, Theodore, you're just trying to fish to see if I'll accidentally tell you a test question or something. The hardest part of this test is, to be honest, I don't think it's hard because when you're doing checks and balances, you just have to look at which branches are being affected. And I don't mind literally, again, grab a piece of paper and write down, man, the executive is doing this to the legislative. Focus on that aspect of the question. Like, that's all you have to do for the second test. The first test, you just have to remember what their responsibilities are. Um, to be honest, like regulate foreign and interstate trade. I'm worried about you guys forgetting that. Declaring war. I'm worried about you forgetting that because I'm afraid you're going to mix it up with the president because that's what you guys all associate with because that's what you've grown up with, even though we know it's Congress, legislative. And that's not true, Mariah. I've told you when I think tests are hard. I think this is an average test. What if only you and Nick get hundreds? I will be shocked again. That was that was weird. I'll make you a deal, Rami. I will make sure nobody ever says pastrami again if you get hundreds on both tests. Because if you're impeaching him, usually that means he committed some kind of crime, and then the courts, the Supreme Court, would rule on it as well. They would basically have a trial for that presidential candidate. Regulating interstate and foreign trade is legislative, and that's why I said I'm concerned with it. All right, guys, you got anything else? Any more questions? Theodore, I think sometimes when you have all this time to type and you try to type a very intelligent and well thought out response, I think the only person you're trolling is yourself. Rami took it as motivation and is not taking it as bullying. Therefore, it does not consider bullying when he uses the name himself or name calling. Well, but I'm not going to go over all the points for the branches again because you can rewatch the video. Okay, it would take me another 15, 20 minutes. It's not that I don't want to be helpful. I just want to end the video too because, um, you know, go eat my dinner and everything like that. That is your only power, correct, Mariah? All right, any other questions? Well, what, Wubit? Prepares is going to be executive, yes. Legislative is going to be approve. So executive sets it up, Congress approves it. President says, I choose you, Pikachu, appointing someone for a position. Congress approves it, confirms it, all that stuff. Alright, you guys have a good night, okay? I don't see any other questions. Call a special session of Congress. You know, it's one thing we didn't go over. The executive branch does have the right to call a special session of Congress saying, like, hey, I need you, it's an emergency, come back to work, even if Congress is on vacation. Is it going to be on the test? I don't know. I didn't put much stock on it. I don't think I included it on the test, to be honest. It's a rarely used power. It's used only in emergencies, really. But you're right to know about it, Mariah. So good job on bringing it up. I did make the test. I don't have every question in my head memorized. I know all the material I based it on. Because I don't have the test open on this computer right now in front of me. Alright, guys. Have a good one.